What if the smartest mind at Harvard wasn't a professor, but a janitor's son who wandered into the wrong room one night? Some kids sneak into concerts, others slip into movie theaters without a ticket. But on one quiet Tuesday evening in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 10-year-old Nathan Reyes wandered into a place most grown men would be too intimidated to enter. He stepped into a Harvard mathematics lecture he hadn't meant to. His father, David Reyes, worked as a janitor on the university campus, usually cleaning the academic buildings during the late shift. Nathan was just supposed to wait for him near the stairwell outside Lecture Hall 5, like he always did. He had a small paperback in his lap and his head tucked into a hoodie 2 sizes too big. His shoes flapped at the toes and his backpack sagged with age. Nobody paid him much attention, and that was how Nathan liked it. But then the lecture hall door creaked open. A wave of voices, sharp and rhythmic, poured into the hallway. They weren't arguing or laughing. They were discussing deeply, precisely, like the words had weight. Nathan looked up. Inside, equations danced across the chalkboard in chalky arcs. A professor's voice echoed through the grand room like a conductor directing an orchestra of logic. His curiosity, that relentless tug inside him, overruled everything else. Without thinking, he stood. He looked around to make sure no one noticed, then slipped quietly through the door and into the room. The room was older than any classroom he had ever seen. Oak-paneled walls, worn leather chairs, and tall windows that caught the dying light of evening. The place smelled faintly of chalk, old books, and ambition. No one noticed Nathan enter, or maybe they did and just assumed he was some assistant's kid or another part of the invisible support staff. He could have sat near the back, close to the exit, but Nathan walked right up to the front row and sat down. Something about the board called to him. Standing at the lectern was Dr. Gregory Alcott, a man with a reputation that stretched from MIT to Princeton. He was known for his brilliance and his lack of patience. Tall, lean, with sharp features and an even sharper voice, he dressed in a slate-grey blazer and carried himself like someone who'd long since run out of time for mediocrity. "Tonight's equation, Doctor," Alcott said, tapping the board with a piece of chalk, "has defeated every graduate student in this room. If you're looking for something easy, you're in the wrong department." A few students laughed nervously. Nathan didn't. He was staring at the board. Lines of variables, strange symbols, nested loops on the surface. It looked chaotic, even intimidating. But to Nathan, it was something else. It was music, patterns, rhythm. It wasn't just math. It was a language, and he could almost hear what it was trying to say. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small mechanical pencil, just a worn-down stub he'd found on the subway weeks ago. The eraser was gone, the plastic grip half melted, but it still wrote. Nathan didn't try to solve the problem. Not yet. Instead, he started to sketch around it, mapping the flow of logic, adjusting variables, rotating assumptions like puzzle pieces. He worked quietly, carefully, lost in the hum of numbers. A graduate student sitting beside him noticed. "What are you doing?" the student whispered. "I think he missed a condition," Nathan murmured, eyes never leaving the paper. "If the loop references itself in prime intervals, the constraint collapses." The student blinked. "What?" Before Nathan could clarify, the student raised his hand. "Professor Alcott," he said hesitantly, "someone in the front row may have found something." The room stilled. Dr. Alcott lowered his chalk. "What someone?" The student hesitated. The kid. Alcott's gaze dropped like a hammer. He spotted Nathan, the boy in the oversized hoodie, hunched over a sheet of paper. He walked slowly down the steps toward him, the sound of his shoes clicking against the stone floor with each deliberate step. Nathan didn't move. When Alcott reached the front row, he didn't speak. He simply held out his hand. Nathan handed over the paper. The professor scanned it in silence, 30 seconds, a minute. Then he looked back at the board. With careful motion, he lifted the chalk and made a single change to the equation, then another. The room watched in awe as the once untouchable problem began to shift. "This," Alcott finally said, holding up Nathan's notes, "is not a solution, but it's a terrifyingly accurate start." Then he turned to the boy. "What's your name?" "Nathan," he said, eyes wide. "That's not what I asked. Who are you?" "I'm nobody," Nathan replied. "My dad works here." Dr. Alcott nodded slowly. Then he looked around the room. "What are you doing tomorrow at 5 p.m.? Nathan shrugged. "Having dinner with my dad." "Bring him." "My office." "Room 814. Don't be late." And just like that, he turned and walked away. The lecture resumed, but no one was paying attention. Whispers filled the air, but Nathan didn't move. He sat perfectly still, staring at the chalkboard like it held the key to something he'd only just begun to understand. Later that night, Nathan didn't talk much. His father, David, pushed the mop down the same halls he had for years, unaware that anything had changed. But when they got home to their small apartment above the laundromat, Nathan didn't turn on the TV. He didn't scroll through a borrowed phone. Instead, he pulled out an old textbook he'd found in a box marked free at the Cambridge Public Library. He read until his eyelids ached, and just before sleep took him, Nathan whispered into the dark, "I want to understand the world the way numbers do." The next afternoon, as the late winter wind curled through the alleyways of Cambridge, Nathan Reyes stood in front of room 814 in Jefferson Hall. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, still held together with frayed stitching and patches. Beside him stood his father, David Reyes, looking like a man who would rather be anywhere else. David had changed into his cleanest shirt. The faint stains of bleach still showed at the cuffs, and his boots squeaked slightly with each nervous shift of his weight. He kept adjusting the collar of Nathan's hoodie like it made a difference. "You sure this isn't about you getting in trouble?" he asked under his breath. Nathan shook his head. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just wrote something." David sighed. "Kiddo, Harvard doesn't call janitors into faculty offices because their sons like to doodle." It wasn't a doodle. Before David could ask more, the door opened. Professor Gregory Alcott stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. He didn't look particularly pleased, but not angry either, just calculating, the way a chess master might study a board after an unexpected move. "You're early?" Alcott said. "I like early," Nathan replied quietly. Alcott tilted his head ever so slightly. "Good. Come in." The office was nothing like David expected. No piles of books, no awards lining the walls. Just one long desk, a few chairs, and a massive whiteboard stretching across the far wall. It was covered in layers of equations, lines half erased, symbols lingering like ghost trails. It didn't feel cluttered, it felt deliberate, like a mind poured out in ink and chalk. "Sit," Alcott said, gesturing toward the chairs. Nathan obeyed. David followed more hesitantly, knees awkwardly angled, his calloused hands fumbling with the fabric at his waist where a wedding band used to be. "Professor," David began, "I appreciate you seeing us, but if this is about some kind of—" "He's not in trouble," Alcott interrupted, voice sharp. "I'm not here to scold. I'm here to understand." He turned his gaze on Nathan. "What exactly did you see last night?" Nathan blinked. "You mean the equation?" "Yes, the one that's baffled 6 graduate students and 2 visiting fellows." "How did you know to isolate the recursive prime intervals?" Nathan shrugged. "It looked off." "Off how?" Like a song with a note in the wrong place." Alcott narrowed his eyes. "You compare mathematics to music?" "Sometimes," Nathan said, after thinking for a moment. "They both repeat, but not always the same way. It's like patterns with a purpose." David stared at his son, lips parted slightly. "It was like hearing a new language come out of someone you thought you knew." Alcott leaned back slowly in his chair. "And where did you learn to think like that?" Nathan hesitated. "Nowhere. No tutoring, no math competitions, no online coursework." Nathan shook his head. "Just books. And sometimes I watch people work on problems on YouTube, or when I peek into classrooms, I think about it a lot. Even when I sleep." The room was quiet for a long stretch. Not uncomfortable silence, curious, tense, like everyone was waiting for someone to name what they already suspected. Alcott finally stood and walked to the whiteboard. He picked up a marker, but didn't turn around. "Come here." Nathan stood and walked forward, small sneakers squeaking against the tile. Alcott wrote a new equation, simpler than the one from the night before, but still layered and abstract. "Solve for x," he said, without looking. Nathan tilted his head, reading the problem like it was a short story. Then he picked up the blue marker. Slowly, carefully, step by step, he began to work. His hand paused only once, just long enough to catch a mistake and scribble a quick correction beside it. Negative root collapses in real set. Alcott read the note and turned to study the boy. "Tell me something, Nathan," he said quietly. "Do you want to learn?" "I already do." "No, I mean really learn. Not from the back of classrooms. Not from borrowed notebooks, I mean with structure, with access. With someone to challenge you." Nathan glanced back at his dad, uncertain. David cleared his throat. We can't afford anything like that. If this is leading to some private program or tuition discussion, I can save you the trouble." "It wouldn't cost you a dime," Alcott interrupted again. "There's a private fund for students with unusual promise. No fees, no red tape, but the entry exam is brutal. If he qualifies, he earns his spot." Nathan's eyes lit up. "When?" "Next month." David leaned forward, protective instincts kicking in. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Alcott replied, "is that if he fails, there's no second chance. And even if he passes, Harvard doesn't usually make exceptions for 10-year-olds. The road will be harder, colder, and far less forgiving than it is for the rest." David exhaled, jaw tense. "He's just a kid." Alcott met Nathan's eyes. "No, he's an anomaly, and anomalies don't wait for permission." Nathan looked back at the whiteboard. The symbols were still there, waiting, calling. He didn't need to understand all of them, not yet. But he knew this feeling, like something inside him had been asleep for years, and now it was waking up. "I'm not afraid of failing," he said. Alcott's mouth twitched, almost into a smile. "Good. Then let's make the world uncomfortable. That night, the walk home was quiet. David carried their dinner in a brown paper bag, while Nathan counted prime numbers under his breath. It should have been a normal night. But nothing felt normal anymore. When they got back to their small apartment above the laundromat, David sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just staring at a pile of unopened bills. Finally, he whispered to himself, not with pride, but something deeper. I didn't raise a prodigy. I just tried to keep him warm. And in the other room, under the blanket, with a flashlight, Nathan flipped through an old math textbook someone had left behind at the library. Not because anyone told him to, not because it was assigned, but because for the first time in his life, it felt like he might finally be allowed to belong. It was a grey, wind-bitten morning in Cambridge when Nathan Reyes zipped up his hoodie, adjusted the straps on his battered backpack, and walked alongside his father through the gates of Harvard once again. This time, he wasn't sneaking into a lecture or tagging along after a janitor. He was here for something official, something that might change everything. Room 417 in the Department of Mathematics was on the third floor, tucked between two labs that always smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee. There was no sign on the door, no crowd, no announcements. Just a plain wooden room and a proctor inside who had been told to expect someone unusual. Nathan knocked, then pushed the door open. The man behind the desk looked up, mid-40s maybe, with rectangular glasses and a stern face that didn't offer much in the way of welcome. "You're Nathan?" he asked, though he already knew. Nathan nodded. "You're early." "I like early." The man gestured to a single desk in the middle of the room. There were no other students. No noise, just silence, like the air was holding its breath. "No calculators," the proctor said. "No internet. You have 3 hours. Begin when ready." Nathan slid into the chair and placed two things on the desk: a worn pencil case with a broken zipper and the notebook Professor Alcott had given him the week before. Every page in it was filled some with equations, some with mistakes, and some with one-word ideas circled in red: assumption, pattern, counterpoint. The proctor handed him a paper, face down. "You may begin." Nathan flipped it over. The first problem wasn't hard. In the traditional sense, it was designed to overwhelm, a mess of variables and functions twisted together, dressed in abstraction. It wasn't asking for a solution. It was asking, "Will you give up?" Nathan smiled. This wasn't a question. It was a maze, and he loved mazes. Instead of starting from the top, he scanned to the second-to-last line, where recursion folded in on itself. That's where traps usually lived. He traced backward, like unraveling yarn, and when he found the break in the loop, the logical sinkhole that made the entire thing collapse, he picked up his pencil and began. Down the hall, behind a two-way mirror, Professor Gregory Alcott stood in silence, arms crossed. Dean Catherine Langley stood beside him, watching as the boy's small hand moved with precise, steady strokes. "He's 10, she said. "I know," Alcott replied. "This is insane." He restructured a proof last week that had stumped the department for months. Langley frowned. "Genius doesn't guarantee maturity." "No," Alcott said, eyes never leaving the boy. "But it guarantees spark. And we're a university. Our job is to find the sparks before they burn out in the dark." She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "If he fails, you clean up the mess." Alcott nodded. If he fails, he walks out with dignity. But if he passes, Langley interrupted, you really think he will? I don't think, Alcott said. I already know. Back in room 417, Nathan reached the fourth question. This one was different. It didn't ask for a numerical answer. It asked, why does this question matter? He blinked. Most students would freeze here. They're trained to find answers, not meaning. But Professor Alcott had taught him something important. Not all problems exist to be solved. Some exist to make you see. Nathan stared at the page, then wrote, if a problem loops infinitely, it isn't broken. It's asking you to change how you view time. He sat back. Maybe it wasn't right, but it was honest, and in that moment, that mattered more. By the time the third hour ticked into the room, Nathan's legs tingled. His fingers were sore. His pencil was down to a nub. But he pressed on, line by line, proof by proof. Because he wasn't just here to prove he was smart. He was here to answer a question he had carried his entire life. Do I belong? At 11:58 a.m., he laid down his pencil. The paper in front of him didn't look like homework. It looked like a roadmap to a part of his brain no one had seen before. And for the first time, Nathan wasn't afraid of anyone reading it. The proctor approached silently. He took the pages, glanced at the name written at the top. Nathan Reyes, no middle name, no titles. Just a name. Done? He asked. Nathan nodded. The man hesitated, then said softer than before, good luck. Nathan didn't reply. He didn't need to. He had already done something more important than finish a test. He had shown up. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. Not because he was anxious, he was used to uncertainty, but because something inside him had shifted. He used to solve math problems to escape the world, to disappear inside something neat and logical. But now, for the first time, he realized he wasn't trying to escape anymore. He was trying to enter. To step through doors that had always felt locked from the inside. Around 1 a.m., he climbed out onto the rooftop of their apartment building, notebook in his lap, legs crossed beneath him. From there, he could just barely see the towers of Harvard in the distance, glowing faintly under the winter moon. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message. You didn't just pass. You outscored every applicant. Welcome to the other side of the equation. Nathan stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then slowly, he opened his notebook to a fresh page. In the corner, he drew a square, then a doorway, then a stick figure of himself standing in front of it. This time, the door was open. Harvard didn't roll out red carpets for 10-year-olds. Nathan Reyes learned that quickly. There were no welcome banners, no special announcements, and certainly no cheering crowds waiting outside Jefferson Hall. On his first official day as a student, Nathan walked through the heavy leather-bound doors of the mathematics department with a laminated student ID swinging awkwardly from his neck. It felt more like stepping into someone else's story than his own. The hallway buzzed with the shuffle of students, some twice his height and 3 times his age. They carried sleek laptops, spilled coffee, and a casual sense of entitlement. Conversations whipped past him fast, technical, peppered with inside jokes and half-finished formulas. Nobody looked down. Nobody made room, except when they noticed his shoes. Worn. Thin. One held together with duct tape, the same roll his dad had used to patch a pipe under the sink the night before. Nathan kept walking. Midway down the hall, a tall student with perfect posture bumped into him. "Watch it, kid," the guy snapped, then paused when he saw Nathan's face. "You lost? This is the math building, not daycare." Nathan blinked. "I know." "I'm enrolled." The student stared, then scoffed and walked away. Nathan didn't answer. He'd already learned that silence was often the smarter response. His first class was Advanced Structures in Nonlinear Systems, taught by Dr. Sarah Clinier Young, brilliant professor, known for her speed and her sharp tongue. She didn't blink when Nathan entered the room. "You're late," she said, barely looking up from the whiteboard. "I'm not," Nathan replied. "I'm 4 minutes early." She paused, then pointed to the board. "Good. Use those 4 minutes to solve this." It was a cluster of functions layered over a dynamic system. Students watched with interest as the boy walked to the board. Some smirked. One girl whispered to another. But Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't grab the chalk right away. He read the problem slowly, carefully, then tilted his head like he was hearing music only he could understand. After 3 full minutes of silence, he picked up the chalk and began to write, 1 line at a time. Clear, intentional. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. When he reached the end, he stepped back. "Doctor." Clean raised an eyebrow. "That's correct." Nathan nodded. "There's a shorter way." "But I didn't want to skip steps." There was a beat of silence, then a few surprised chuckles from the back. Not mocking, at least not yet, but close. At lunch, Nathan didn't go to the dining hall. He wasn't on a meal plan. Instead, he sat alone on a bench beneath a tree outside Sever Hall. He pulled a peanut butter sandwich from his backpacks, slightly crushed, wrapped in wax paper, and chewed slowly while watching students pass like rushing streams of motion and purpose. Then came a shadow. "Hey!" Nathan looked up. A girl with glasses too big for her face and a red scarf that looked handmade stood in front of him. "I'm Maya," she said. "I sit 2 rows behind you in Dr. Clean's class." He blinked. "Hi. Mind if I sit?" He shrugged. She sat beside him and unwrapped her own sandwich. They ate in silence for a minute. Then she asked, "How old are you really?" 10. "No way." Nathan pulled out his ID and slid it across the bench. She squinted. "No way." He took a sip from a crinkled water bottle. "Are you going to ask if I'm a freak now?" She frowned. "Why would I do that?" He shrugged. "That's what people usually ask, or whisper, or stare." She paused. "You don't look like you care." "I do. I just don't show it yet." That evening, Professor Alcott found Nathan in room 214, the very classroom where it all began. The room was empty, but the board was filled with matrices. Not from a lesson, not homework, just thoughts. Arrangements, ideas. "Long day?" Alcott asked, stepping inside. Nathan nodded. "They laugh sometimes." "Do they?" "Not always to my face." Alcott stood beside him, hands behind his back. "What do you think makes them laugh?" Nathan didn't answer. "Is it the shoes?" Alcott asked. Nathan looked down. "Probably." "Then don't change the shoes," Alcott said. "Change the narrative." Nathan frowned. "What does that mean?" "Brilliance doesn't apologize for arriving in worn sneakers," he replied. "But it does make people uncomfortable. Use that." Nathan didn't say anything right away. Then he erased one of the matrices on the board. I think I want to teach someday, he said. Alcott raised an eyebrow. Why? Because most teachers only teach to the loud ones. I want to teach the quiet ones too. There was a long pause. Alcott turned toward the door. There's a seminar next week, problem solving under constraint. You should attend. I'm not enrolled. I didn't ask if you were. That night, David sat across from his son at their kitchen table. How was it? He asked. Nathan shrugged. Good. That bad, huh? Nathan hesitated. They don't think I'm supposed to be there. David leaned back and sighed. They're not wrong. But not for the reason they think. Nathan looked up, confused. You're not supposed to be there, Nathan, David said, voice soft but firm. Because kids like you sons of janitors, kids from nowhere aren't written into the story they're telling. You're not part of the script. Nathan stayed quiet. But that doesn't mean you're wrong for showing up, David continued. It just means you'll have to write your own chapter. Nathan stared at his notebook. His pencil twitched in his hand. Then I better make it good. David smiled. That's my boy. It started with whispers. They floated down the corridors of Jefferson Hall, subtle at first, half-laughed comments, exchanged glances, unfinished sentences. By Monday morning, they were no longer whispers. They were accusations. Nathan Reyes had done it again. He had solved a combinatorics problem that had stumped the department's top graduate students for weeks. Problem number 47. No one had expected it to be cracked, certainly not by a 10-year-old boy in a second-hand hoodie. But there it was, posted on the departmental results board in bold white chalk. Problem 47. Solved. N. Reyes. The hallway went quiet when the notice appeared. For 10 seconds, no one spoke. Then came the snickers. Impossible, someone muttered. He must have cheated, said another. Richard Greer, a senior with a fellowship pending and an ego built on competitive math scores, paced outside Professor Alcott's office, voice rising. I've been working on that problem for 2 semesters, and now he solves it overnight? He pointed down the hall where Nathan had just passed, oblivious. Have you seen his shoes? Someone added with a laugh. It's a PR stunt. Harvard's poster child, a janitor's kid in a hoodie. Makes for good headlines. Maya Chen, standing around the corner, heard every word. Her fists clenched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She'd seen Nathan work meticulous, quiet, deliberate. He didn't cut corners, he didn't guess, he understood. By noon, an official complaint had been filed. Claim, academic dishonesty. Reason, suspected ghostwriting or unauthorized assistance. Source, anonymous. At 1:13 p.m., the email landed in the inbox of Dean Catherine Langley. She didn't reply. She simply forwarded the message to Professor Alcott with a short line beneath. If he's a fraud, it's your legacy on the line. At 2:05 p.m., Nathan was pulled from his seminar and led to Professor Alcott's office. He entered quietly, clutching his notebook like a shield. Alcott didn't speak right away. He watched the boy, his face unreadable. Then he said it plainly. They think you cheated. Nathan didn't blink. I didn't. I know. Nathan looked up. But knowing isn't the same as proving, Alcott said. And in this place, the burden of proof rarely falls on the accuser. Nathan swallowed hard. What do I do? Alcott leaned forward. You do what you've always done. You solve the problem. That night, Nathan didn't go home. He returned to room 214's the classroom where everything had begun and stayed until 3:47 a.m. The board filled with chalk again, equations, mistakes, rewrites. His fingers cramped, his hoodie sleeves smudged with dust, but he kept going. He didn't just reproduce the final answer to problem 47. He showed every line that had led there, every dead end, every revision, every crossed-out section and correction. He let the board tell the real story, not of genius, but of persistence, of process. Beside his solution, he taped a sticky note. I don't need you to believe the answer. I need you to believe I walked the road. By sunrise, Maya had taken a picture of the board and posted it to the student network with the caption, "This is what genius looks like. Not filtered, not perfect. Just real." By mid-morning, the photo had hundreds of shares. By lunch, it was printed and pinned next to the faculty lounge coffee machine. Even Dean Langley saw it. She didn't say anything, but she sent one more line to Professor Alcott. He made me believe. 2 days later, the department released its official statement. No evidence of misconduct. All work confirmed as original. Case closed. But the statement wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that when Nathan walked into class that afternoon, nobody laughed. Not because he'd silenced them, but because they'd seen it. The proof, not just on paper, but in chalk dust and scribbles, in doubt and correction and stubborn effort. They'd seen the cost of brilliance. And for the first time, they understood that what made Nathan remarkable wasn't just what he knew. It was how he kept going. Even Richard Greer couldn't argue with that. He sat in the back of the room, tight-lipped and red-faced, but quiet. And so, for the first time since arriving at Harvard, Nathan sat in his seat and heard nothing but silence. The kind of silence that meant people were finally listening. That evening, Alcott met Nathan outside Jefferson Hall. The sky had turned to gold. The wind carried the smell of old leaves and new chances. You did it, Alcott said. Nathan shook his head. No. I proved it. That's different. Alcott nodded. And what did it cost? Nathan thought for a moment. Trust, he said, but maybe not mine. That night, in his small apartment, Nathan sat at the kitchen table while his father slept on the couch. He opened his notebook and titled a fresh page, The Equation of Belief. He didn't fill it with numbers. He wrote one line. Brilliance is only visible when someone is willing to look through the dust. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. Harvard kept a list. It wasn't posted online, and it wasn't printed in any official brochure, but every student in the mathematics department knew about it. The list of unsolved problems. 10 in total. Legendary, complex, and intimidating. Some had survived decades without resolution. Not because they were impossible, but because they required something more than knowledge. They demanded vision. Professor Gregory Alcott had once joked that solving one was like convincing time to stand still. Most students barely glanced at them. A few dared to try. Nathan Reyes had never heard of the list, not until he stumbled on it by accident. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. Nathan had been wandering through the faculty archives more out of habit than purpose. A narrow door beside the library led to a storage room filled with aging lecture notes, some from professors who'd retired before he was born. Dust clung to the air like old secrets. That's where he found it. A folder labeled Annoir des Unpublished Lectures. Professor Desai had been a mathematical mystic known more for questions than answers, more for riddles than rules. He had died 10 years earlier, leaving behind pages of theories that read like poetry. In the margins of one of those pages, scrawled faintly in blue ink, was a question. If time flows both forward and inward, where do the endpoints meet? Nathan read it 3 times. Then whispered aloud, "They don't." And something in him clicked. He didn't rush to tell Alcott. He didn't mention it to Maya. He simply went home, taped fresh sheets of paper to the wall above his bed, and began. The problem listed as number 6 on Harvard's infamous board was a topological dual-state paradox. It involved time-variable graphs that resisted all classical proofs. Students had long stopped trying. Professors avoided it in lectures. The joke was that even the question didn't know what it was asking. But Nathan saw it differently. Over 3 sleepless nights, he filled the wall with loops, arrows, and timelines. He used dollar store-colored pens and string from his father's toolbox to connect concepts across space and logic. His hands trembled from fatigue, but his mind burned with clarity. By the 3rd night, he had it. The fold. The subtle symmetry that no one had seen because they had all been looking in the wrong dimension. He wrote the final proof in one sitting, printed it, unsigned, then slid it quietly under Alcott's office door. The next morning, Professor Alcott picked up the document and started reading. By the 3rd page, he stopped. He didn't need to read further. He felt it the way a musician knows the last note of a masterpiece before it's played. It wasn't just correct, it moved. The logic unfolded like breath, precise and alive. He took it to Dean Langley without a word. She skimmed the opening, then the ending. Then went back to the beginning. "Is this his?" she whispered. Alcott nodded. Her hands shook as she turned the final page. That afternoon, an emergency faculty review was called. 5 senior professors. One board, one name, Nathan Reyes. They summoned him to the front of Lecture Hall B, where 100 eyes turned as he entered, small, quiet, hoodie sleeves still too long. "Would you mind walking us through your solution?" asked one professor. Nathan nodded. He didn't speak until he reached the board. Then, slowly, and without a trace of nerves, he picked up the chalk and began. Each line was measured, each symbol intentional. There was no flair, no theatrics, just clarity. He moved, not like someone showing off, but like someone translating, turning abstract math into something human. By the time he finished, the room was completely still. Not a whisper, not a breath. Dean Langley stood slowly, her voice soft and low. "I've taught for 27 years, she said, "and this is the first time I've watched an answer turn into art." The news spread quickly, first through the student message boards, then across the faculty forums, then, somehow, to the campus-wide bulletin system. Problem number 6. Resolved. N. Reyes, March 3rd, 10:17 a.m. There was no party, no confetti, but when Nathan walked into class that afternoon, something had changed. The room didn't look at him. It looked to him. Even the doubters people like Richard couldn't argue now. That evening, Maya found Nathan sitting under their usual tree outside Seaver Hall. He was flipping through his notebook, still quiet, still uncertain. "You did it," she said. Nathan shrugged. "I saw something no one else wanted to look at. That's not what made it genius." He glanced at her. "Then what did?" "You didn't solve it to impress anyone," she replied. You solved it because you couldn't not try. Nathan smiled. In the corner of the page, he had scribbled something. Even closed doors make sound if you knock loud enough. The next day, the university held a formal dinner for faculty and special guests. Nathan was invited. He wore a suit 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled at the cuffs. At the far end of the hall, Dean Langley raised a glass. I've seen hundreds of brilliant minds pass through these halls, she said. But yesterday, I watched a boy solve something we all gave up on. Not because he had to, but because he believed the problem deserved another look. Applause followed. Soft, genuine, not ceremonial. Professor Alcott leaned over to Nathan. How's the suit? Scratchy. You'll get used to it. Nathan smirked. I hope not. That night, Nathan returned to room 214. He erased the last problem from the board. Then, with a slow hand, he wrote something new. What else have we given up on too soon? And he left the door open behind him. The interview was supposed to be small. A graduate student from the journalism department named Olivia Park had approached Nathan one afternoon outside the math building. She was working on a campus series called Faces of Harvard, just short features highlighting people with unique stories. No cameras. Just a recorder, a quiet room, and a few questions. Nathan had agreed mostly because he didn't know how to say no politely. The recording took place in a spare seminar room. Olivia wore jeans, a sweater that looked hand-knit, and a smile that was more curiosity than performance. She clicked on the recorder and leaned in. Can you tell us your name? Nathan. Just Nathan. Your age? 10 3/4. She laughed. That 3/4 matters, huh? Nathan nodded. When you're the smallest person in every room, it counts. She asked him about the moment he solved problem 6. About what it felt like. I didn't solve it to prove I could, Nathan said, his voice calm. I solved it because it wouldn't let me sleep. Olivia paused, visibly moved. How do you feel now, knowing you're the youngest person in Harvard's history to resolve a legacy problem? Nathan thought for a second. Still small. The interview lasted 12 minutes. The video was posted on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, it had over 1 million views. By Sunday night, Nathan's world had changed again. His email inbox overflowed journalists, nonprofits, research institutes, tech companies. A firm in Silicon Valley offered him $500,000 to appear in a commercial about breaking barriers. A talent agent from Los Angeles asked if he'd consider a documentary series. Reporters waited outside his classroom buildings, and somewhere in that wave of attention, something shifted inside him. Not excitement, not pride, something colder. Disconnection. It wasn't the recognition that bothered him. It was how quickly people stopped seeing him and started seeing only a headline. The janitor's son who solved Harvard's hardest problem. Math prodigy stuns the Ivy League. Child genius outsmarts the experts. They made it sound like he'd appeared out of nowhere, a ghost with a pencil, like he didn't belong to anyone, like he wasn't real. One night, Nathan climbed the stairs to the roof of Pierce Hall, hoodie zipped up, the wind tugging at his sleeves. He sat, with his knees pulled to his chest, and stared across the campus lights. Professor Alcott found him there. They think I'm a miracle, Nathan muttered, not looking up. Like I just materialized, like I didn't grow up anywhere. Like I didn't have a father who skipped dinner so I could eat. Alcott sat down beside him. Do you feel real? Nathan nodded. But they don't see that. They just see the chalkboard. Alcott sighed. You're not wrong. But remember, this headlines fade. What matters is what you build when no one's watching. A few days later, Harvard scheduled a press event. Dean Langley personally invited Nathan to speak. He declined. Instead, he wrote her a letter. Thank you for believing in me. But I'm not a story. I'm a student. Please let me learn. She never responded, but the press event was quietly cancelled. Then came an unexpected email. Subject: TEDx Cambridge. They were offering him 12 minutes on stage, one spotlight, thousands in the audience, millions more online. Nathan stared at the screen for 10 minutes before showing Maya. What do you think? He asked. She didn't smile right away. I think it's your chance to speak before the world starts speaking for you. He accepted. On the night of the talk, he wore the same hoodie he'd worn his first day at Harvard. The sleeves were still too long, the holes still there. The crowd hushed as he walked onto the red-carpeted stage. No notes, no slides, just a stick of chalk in his pocket. When I was 7, Nathan began, I solved a problem on a diner napkin while waiting for my dad to finish cleaning the bathrooms. Soft laughter rippled across the room. I didn't know it was calculus. I just thought it looked wrong. He smiled gently. Turns out, most of the world looks wrong when you're not standing in the right place to see it. The audience leaned in. I wasn't supposed to end up at Harvard, he said, not with second-hand shoes. Not as a janitor's kid, not as someone who never walked through the front door. He paused. But I did. And now, they call me a prodigy. He pulled the chalk from his pocket, turned to the blackboard behind him, and wrote 5 words. What else are we missing? He turned back. Sometimes the greatest equation isn't on a board, he said. It's between who we think we are and what we're brave enough to become. The room rose to their feet. That night, the video hit 10 million views, but Nathan didn't check because he wasn't online. He was back in room 214, sitting with a sophomore named Brendan who was on the verge of failing his final. Brendan didn't care about internet fame. He just wanted to understand recursive symmetry, and Nathan just wanted to help, because for him, that was the real equation. Recognition plus service / purpose. Room 214 hadn't changed. Same chalkboard, same flickering light, same faint scent of dry eraser. But that night, something new happened. He wasn't alone. 5 students sat scattered around the room, one on a chair, one cross-legged on the floor, another curled into a borrowed hoodie. Each of them different. One was a first-generation college student. One had failed calculus twice. One had never raised her hand in class. One didn't have a permanent address. And one had stopped believing in himself the day a teacher called him a waste of potential. Nathan stood at the board, chalk in hand. No announcements, no authority, just a note he'd pinned to the bulletin board earlier that week. Midnight math. Room 214, no judgment, no grades, just learning. Come as you are. They came. Not many, but enough. He began with a question, not a lecture. Who here thinks recursion is terrifying? Every hand went up. Nathan grinned. Good. Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And for the next hour, they worked not by rules, but by rhythm, like a conversation. One voice picking up where another trailed off. One mistake becoming the root of someone else's breakthrough. At 1:42 a.m., the girl in the hoodie, Sophia, raised her hand and pointed to a flaw in a function Nathan had written. He blinked. That's brilliant. Really? I missed it. Her eyes filled with something fierce and fragile all at once. Not pride. Recognition. By 2:07 a.m., the room was quiet again. Not from exhaustion, but from fullness. Nathan sat on the edge of the desk, looking at each of them. Then he said, "You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to believe you belong in the room." Nobody spoke. They didn't need to. After everyone left, Nathan erased the board slowly. Not out of duty, but out of ritual. Then, in the bottom corner, he wrote, "She whispered to herself in the dark, until someone whispered back." Session 1. Complete. Midnight Math Society. He didn't lock the door, he left it open. Room 214 wasn't meant to be anything special. It wasn't the biggest classroom at Harvard. The chalkboard was scratched, the windows drafty, and the overhead light flickered with a soft buzz that no maintenance ticket could seem to fix. But every Thursday at 2:14 a.m., the room glowed. Not from the fixtures, but from something else entirely. It had started with 5 students. No fanfare. No roster. Just a handwritten note Nathan had pinned to the student board. Midnight Math. Room 214. No grades. No judgment. Just learning. They came quietly. Some curious. Some desperate. Some just needing a place to belong. But after that first night, something changed. They returned, and the next week, they brought a friend. Then another. By the end of the month, there were 12. They didn't always show up on time. Some drifted in halfway through. Others sat near the door, unsure if they were allowed to stay. Nathan never asked questions. He just smiled and motioned to an open chair, a patch of floor. One girl, Lily, never spoke. Not once. She carried a notebook with a torn corner and scribbled in tiny, precise handwriting. When she finally wrote something on the board, an elegant correction to a group proof, no one clapped. They didn't need to. Nathan looked at her and simply said, "Thank you for trusting us." That was how the Midnight Math Society grew, not with speed, but with sincerity. They weren't there for prestige. They were there because it was the one place on campus where no one needed to pretend. Some had been told they weren't math people. Some had failed out of courses and crawled their way back. One girl, Amara, had dropped out her sophomore year after losing both parents in the same winter. She returned to campus the following fall and found herself in room 214 one night, just watching. It took 3 weeks before she picked up a piece of chalk. When she did, Nathan didn't praise her. He just nodded. Because in that room, every step forward was sacred. Nathan didn't run the sessions like a professor. He wasn't interested in being in charge. He started with a problem, something strange or messy or forgotten, and let the room shape the discussion. Sometimes they solved it, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they solved a different problem entirely, one they hadn't even known they were trying to answer. There were no grades, no syllabus, no titles. Only one rule: come as you are. One night, Maya stopped by after a long lab shift. She wasn't a math major, but she sat in the back, sipping coffee and watching the board. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said afterward. Nathan looked up. "My grandma's kitchen table." Everyone pulled up a chair. Nobody judged if your hands were shaking or if your voice cracked. You just shared what you had. Nathan smiled. That's the idea. Word spread slowly but steadily, a quiet rumor among undergrads, a whispered suggestion from one overwhelmed student to another. Try room 214. It's not official, but it helps. By mid-semester, the room was full every week. Not packed, not noisy, but full in the best sense, buzzing with thought, connection, and breath. Even professors noticed. Dr. Sarah Klein, the same professor who'd once greeted Nathan with skepticism on his first day, stopped by one night just to watch. She didn't say a word, just stood by the door, arms crossed, listening as a sophomore explained her theory on recursion using a spiral diagram and grocery store analogies. When the session ended, Klein turned to Nathan. "I've been teaching for 15 years, she said. "And I've never seen students this awake after midnight." Nathan shrugged. "I think they're just tired of being afraid." Klein nodded. "Keep it going," she said. And he did. Not because he was asked to, because he needed to. One Thursday, Nathan walked into room 214 and found someone had already written on the board, just one sentence, scribbled in crooked handwriting, "Thank you for leaving the door open." He stood there for a while, looking at the words. Then he erased them gently and began that night's problem with a quiet voice. "Let's talk about what happens when assumptions don't hold." That evening, something else happened. One of the society's regulars, a tall student named Malcolm, approached Nathan after everyone had left. "I want to start a physics version," he said. "Same vibe. Just somewhere for kids who are too embarrassed to ask their questions during the day." Nathan's eyes lit up. "You should." "I mean, do I need permission?" Nathan smiled. "Only from yourself." The next week, room 310 across campus held its first midnight mechanics. 7 students showed up. 3 of them eventually found their way back to 214 for math. By the end of the year, there were midnight sessions in 5 departments. Unofficial, unaccredited, unstoppable. Some people scoffed at it. They said it was a phase, that it wasn't real learning. But anyone who sat in those rooms could feel it, the way the air shifted when someone who thought they were invisible finally saw themselves reflected on the board. This wasn't about genius anymore. It was about community. About rewriting the script of what learning could feel like. And Nathan, he was no longer the prodigy in the hoodie. He was a mirror. A guide. A kid who'd once wandered into a lecture hall he didn't belong in and built a door for others to follow. One night, as the clock hit 3 a.m., Nathan sat alone in room 214 again. The board was filled with diagrams and questions that no one had quite finished answering. He erased the board slowly, savoring the silence. Then, in small chalk letters, he wrote, "Midnight Math Society, Year 1 complete." And beneath it, "For everyone who thought they were too late, too lost, or too broken, this room was always yours." Then he packed up his bag, turned off the light, and left the door slightly ajar, just in case someone new needed to walk through it. Years passed. Nathan Reyes didn't vanish into headlines or textbooks. He stayed in motion, quiet, but constant like gravity, like breath. He earned degrees, though he never framed them, published papers, though he never brought them up in conversation. He turned down awards that felt too heavy, interviews that asked the same tired questions, and honorary titles that meant more to others than they did to him. But every Thursday night, the light behind the frosted glass of room 214 still flickered on. Midnight Math Society had become more than a gathering. It had become a tradition. It outlived campus trends, survived administration changes, even weathered construction reroutes. No matter what changed on the outside, students knew they could count on that room, the one that asked nothing from them except honesty. Nathan wasn't always the one leading anymore. Sometimes he sat in the back while someone else stepped to the board. Sometimes he just listened. But he was always there. Because he remembered what it felt like to walk into a room and be seen for the first time. And he'd made a promise, long ago, to leave the door open behind him. One winter evening, as snow whispered down across the campus, Dean Evelyn Langley requested a meeting. She was retiring. 41 years at the university, most of them spent carrying more weight than she ever showed. Her hair had silvered completely, her stride slower, but her mind sharp as ever. Nathan arrived at her office just before dusk. The walls were lined with awards and framed quotes from historic faculty, but in the middle of her desk sat only a file folder with his name on it. "Nathan," she said, rising, "thank you for coming." He nodded, setting his bag down. She gestured toward a seat. "Do you know what you've done here?" "I've just been teaching," he replied. She smiled gently. "You've been changing the blueprint." She opened the folder. Inside were photos, articles, handwritten notes from students. Some from years ago, some as recent as last month. One note read, "I was failing, not just my classes, my belief in myself." Room 214 reminded me that learning wasn't about performance, it was about being seen. Another, "He never made me feel dumb, only brave." Langley looked up. "You've helped hundreds of students, Nathan, maybe more." He said nothing. His hands were folded, still like always. She continued, "We're establishing something in your honor." He blinked. "The Reyes Initiative. It will fund peer-led learning spaces across every department built on your model. No exams, no rankings, just questions, collaboration, and the radical idea that everyone deserves a chance to understand." Nathan exhaled. "You don't have to name it after me." "We do," she said, "because it started with you." He sat quietly for a moment, then asked, "Do you think that's what genius is?" Langley tilted her head. "What do you think it is?" He looked out the window, where snow continued to fall in soft, unhurried flakes. "I used to think genius was answers," he said. "Speed, brilliance under pressure. The kind of mind that walks into a room and knows the solution before the question's finished." He paused. "But now I think genius is something else." "What's that?" He turned back to her. "It's seeing someone struggling and showing them where the door is." Langley smiled. "And then?" "And then, holding it open." Later that night, Nathan returned to room 214. It was empty, just him and the board, and the echo of hundreds of Thursdays layered like sediment in the air. He stood at the front and looked around, not with nostalgia, but with gratitude. Then he picked up a piece of chalk and began to write. Not an equation, a story. A timeline of the society. The nights no one showed up. The nights 30 did. The first girl who cried after solving her first proof. The boy who failed everything else but aced his final after 2 months of sitting cross-legged in the back. The woman in her 30s who had returned to finish a degree she left behind years ago and had found courage in the rhythm of midnight learning. He drew arrows, names, doodles. It wasn't beautiful, but it was true. And when he finished, he stepped back. In the corner, he wrote one last line. "Genius is not what you know, it's what you share." Then he left. Not the building, not the university, just that moment. Because Nathan Reyes wasn't done. He'd never be done. He started traveling. Quietly, visiting schools in towns where math was a punishment instead of a joy. Speaking not on stages, but in community centers, church basements, after-school programs. He showed up with notebooks and dollar store pencils. He listened more than he talked. He never introduced himself as the boy who solved problem 6. He just said, "Hi, I'm Nathan. Let's look at this together." People still told stories about him, but the ones he cherished were the ones nobody printed. Like the letter from a 13-year-old girl in Detroit who wrote, "I thought I was stupid until I saw you say that the way I see patterns is music." Or the note left in a public library copy of Topology for Beginners. "This book was too hard until I stopped being afraid of being wrong." Nathan kept those tucked inside a box under his bed. One day he returned to Harvard not as a student, not as a teacher, but as a witness. Room 214 was still open. Still flickering. This time, he sat in the back while a girl named Zoe, freshman nervous hands, big glasses, stood at the board. She got something wrong. Someone else raised a hand and helped. Zoe smiled. "I almost had it." "You will," the boy said. "Try again." Nathan didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the room had already learned how to listen. The janitor's son never became a celebrity. He became something harder. He redefined genius. Not as something born, but as something shared. One Thursday night at a time. One piece of chalk, one open door, at a time. The story of Nathan Reyes reminds us that genius is not about where you come from, it's about what you're willing to give. For many older Americans who have spent a lifetime working, raising families, or quietly contributing behind the scenes, this message carries a powerful truth. Brilliance isn't defined by degrees or titles. It's found in perseverance, in the courage to show up when no one expects you to, and in the grace to open doors for others once you've walked through. Nathan's journey teaches us that real learning never ends. Whether we're 10 or 70, we all have something to teach and something to learn. The power of listening, of mentoring, of creating spaces where others feel seen, these are the legacies that matter. In a world chasing spotlight, Nathan chose substance. He reminds us that sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest wisdom, and that changing a life doesn't require fame, just compassion, patience, and the willingness to believe in someone who doesn't yet believe in themselves. And perhaps that's the truest form of genius.